Very much for attending. Today, we're going to go through a SureCloud live demo of our compliance management solution. Just give me a sec. So a brief introduction about myself, and then I've got my colleague Simran on as well. So my name's Matthew Davis. I'm the product director at SureCloud. I'm responsible for the applications. Prior to being with SureCloud, I did 5, 6, 7 years working in GRC technology, helping customers to operationalize their GRC frameworks and how they can build them out. I've got experience with many of the GRC tools out there. And then I've also got my colleague Simran from the Solution Advisor team. Simran, do you mind just briefly introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Matt. Hi, everybody. My name's Simran. I'm a senior solutions consultant here at SureCloud. I do a lot of the demonstrations, the editing of requirements, working with clients on a day-to-day basis to see how their requirements best align to the products that SureCloud has to offer. Shortly at the start of my time in SureCloud, I actually was in the implementations team, so did a lot of the project work, implementing and deploying these applications to client environments too.
Thanks, Simran. The other thing is we are going to have a Q&A at the end, so if anyone has got any questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll spend some time going through them at the end. Perfect. So what we're going to cover in today's session. So the first one is we're going to walk through how SureCloud can help you to embed and move to a baseline control set. So for those who aren't aware, one of the things that we do is we do support baseline control sets. So the idea is you have many regulatory requirements or any kind of compliance requirement that meets one control. So you can have one control for policy management, etc., rather than having 5, 6, 7 controls. It's how you can streamline compliance. The second one is how to embed a proactive approach to compliance. So how can you be proactive in how you monitor controls? How can you keep on top of your controls, keep them changed, keep them updated, and make sure you're testing them? And the final one is how you create live compliance documentation. So you're moving from having to spend all your time and your business stakeholders building compliance documentation for each mandate or audit that you've got to do. You're really simplifying that and making that much easier. So what are the big challenges for today's security and compliance professionals? Well, I think the first thing to think about here is, first one is ensuring business is done quickly and securely. It may seem obvious, this is a really difficult thing to balance, but it's making sure that you are enabling business to be done quickly and securely, but you're not blocking it, because there's a fine line to tread, isn't there? There's too much control where actually all people are doing, spending all their time doing compliance and security things, but at the same time as making sure that you're not putting data or the company at risk. The second one is reducing the number of repetitive compliance processes. The number of people who work in compliance are always saying, or even the business stakeholders, there's so many things that we're being asked to do all the time. I'm being asked to test the same control 5 or 6 different times, and I'm spending all my time on it. And really what we should be doing is really automating this and making it much, much less onerous on our stakeholders. The third one is understanding the ever-increasing number of compliance requirements. We all know that what started as a very simple compliance mandate quickly can become very, very complicated, and it's keeping on top of those and really simplifying it to make it easier. And the final one is making it easier for testing. At the moment, a lot of organizations are struggling with testing 4 or 5 sets of controls that are ultimately very, very similar, and keeping on top of that and getting the business to be engaged is very difficult, because they end up with a lot of audit fatigue and they're just answering questions but not really understanding the value of those requirements and how it's embedded in the business. So let's talk through how end-to-end control management works within SureCloud. So we are agnostic to frameworks. We support many of them out there, be they a baseline framework like the UCF, the ISF standards of good practice, high trust, SCF. We support all of those, or you can take direct frameworks like ISO, NIST, whatever it is that you pull in. You can pick your control framework or frameworks that you want to adhere to. You can then tailor those to your organization. So we all know that, yes, you bring that framework in, but you need to adapt it, making sure it's fit for purpose, it's scoped and makes sense for your organization. You can then take those controls, which we will call a master control or an organizational control, And then you can instantiate it and create operational copies for each of the areas of the business. So you're really embedding a single control framework to really, really simplify it, where you've not got duplication, you have one control for each thing, but you can then deploy it for each area. So that could be a business, it could be a business area, it could be an asset, it could be a process. You can then test it, and then you can get results at regional levels as well, or asset levels. So you can view at compliance from many different areas. So you can slice and dice the data. You can then maintain a single source of truth. So you can see all of your all your controls. You can roll them up so you can see where you've got issues or you've got failures or non-conformities. And then if you're using, again, a baseline control framework, or you've mapped them to a bunch of regulations, you can then report on each of your regulations individually to really simplify it. So you're saying this one control meets many requirements, and we can test our password control across everything and see and identify any control gaps or failures. So I'm going to do a brief overview of what we're going to cover in the demo, and then I'll hand over to Simran to get into the main bit of the demo. So the first one is we're going to talk through how we can establish a framework. So either add your own frameworks or import one, and how we can actually manage the updates of it. So one of the things that is always challenging with GRC tools or technology is you can get your framework in there, but how do you keep it up to date? How do you change it? How do you adopt it? So we can show you how we do automatic updates and how we stage gate changes to the controls. We're going to show you how you can simply create controls for each of your operational areas. So you're not having to create lots of mundane tasks to do it. You can just say, I actually want to embed these 10 controls in these 10 business areas and create them. So show you some of our scheduling and test capability, so how you can schedule, conduct control tests, and the different options that we have around design tests, operating tests, and self-assessments. Whole way through it, you'll see reporting and dashboards, so how you can produce that live compliance documentation and keep on top of it. And then finally, how you can embed more of a proactive approach to really monitor compliance. Once you've got those standardized control sets, you can then use our technology to define business rules to automatically see how a control is performing over time without having to use, well, a person to go and retrieve and give you that data. I'm going to stop there. And what we're going to do is we're going to hand over to Simran. So Simran, if you don't mind sharing your screen.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Matt. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen now. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. Yep, I'm going to take that as a yes. I can see Matt nodding. Thanks so much, Matt. So hi, everyone. What you can see in front of you at the moment is the SureCloud. Let me move that panel out of the way so we can see this properly. The SureCloud platform. So just to give you a very quick background, I've started on the dashboard that gives us a compliance overview of the different regulations, the different controls we're assessing across our organization, and it provides us a holistic view of the implementation, as well as the different key controls that we're looking at across each of the different regulations. Now, the data that you see in front of you is filtered depending on the access that individuals have to the environment. So if you only sit within the HR, you'll only be able to see the controls that are related to that given area. Now, we're going to come back to dashboards towards the very, very end, but I want to talk to you in more detail about how we can actually select the different regulations and controls that we wish to report against in our environment. So I'm going to start our journey over in our control library. So what you see in front of us at the moment is the master control library. This is where all your controls for the different regulations and frameworks that you wish to comply with are stored. Now, as Matt mentioned, SureCloud supports many different regulations from HIPAA, NIST, ISO to the likes of GDPR, not only for those in the UK or the US, but all over the world. So that's quite important globally as well. Now, what I can see here is some of the information that I have around the controls already in my library, with other cursory information about the relevant controls in terms of regulations and citations too. But if I wanted to go ahead and add initially or update the control list that I have here, I can go ahead and use the secure control framework, which is actually integrated with the SureCloud solution. Now, the secure control framework, for those of you that are not aware, actually helps us normalize the controls, and it interlinks different areas where laws, regulations, and frameworks intersect one another. So it allows us to rationalize common controls and to report on it from there on. So I've selected the secure control framework to be the framework that I'm looking at today. I'm then going to go ahead and click next in my wizard-driven view here and select the different regulations that I wish to go ahead and report on. So here we can see there are pre-selected regulations already listed. I can type in the likes of, for example, PCI DSS using the search bar, or even the likes of GDPR if I want to take a look at any of those regulations too. As you can see here, there are hundreds of different regulations to select from. But once you have selected the regulations that you wish to comply with, you can then go ahead and decide the different domains or the scope of business that you wish to look at in terms of your controls. So in this case, I've selected a number of different domains. I can either select all of them or just go ahead and select the ones that are relevant. In this case, I also want to take a look at embedded technology and endpoint security. The final screen here actually shows me a filtered list of controls based on the previous screens, and I can go ahead and import those all into my library. Now, for those of you that don't want to or have your own personal controls that you wish to import into a centralized library, we also offer the ability to be able to import those. So those can be imported through a template that has been provided by SureCloud and mapped to other controls and regulations if you wish to go ahead and do so. Now, as we mentioned in the initial walkthrough, it's all very well that you have all these initial controls, including your own, in your library from day one. But what happens when it gets to the likes of PCI, GDPR, NIST frameworks, or even ISO updating 2 or 3 months down the line? Well, SureCloud can actually push that update directly to you. So here you can see visibly there is a control that requires an update. I can either decide to automatically update those changes, or I can view the differences between my current version or ignore the changes completely. So let's go ahead and view those differences. SureCloud uses Redline, which allows you to visibly see exactly what is being taken out of the control in this case, and what else is being added in to see what the differences are in a comparative view. If I'm happy with these changes, I can go ahead and update that control. Not only will that update my control in my library here, but it will also update the control if it is operating in any other area, such as different regions, different departments, wherever else that has been operationalized. It will also push the update to those individual control owners, who from their side can then choose to accept or reject the change. Now I'm going to go ahead and dive into this control to see it in a little bit more detail. We have a workflow piece at the top here that actually shows you from the moment that the control has been selected to the moment it is active in your organization. The information that you visibly see here is enriched from the SEF. They provide a lot of foundational information such as the description, different question controls, but more importantly, where this control actually maps to other regulations. So I can see visibly here, this particular control maps the likes of ISO and even visibly showing me what citations in this regulation or framework it is mapping to. If I scroll down a little bit further, I can also see the different types of control maturity I can measure my control against. Again, this is provided by the SEF and allows you to go ahead and understand on a control by control basis what the different levels of maturity are. We also go ahead and look at testing. So we look at the likes of design, operating, and self-assessment guidance. Here you can see there are a number of different tests that have been conducted, but we're going to come back to testing in a little while. But before we move on, I want to go ahead and show you that this particular control can be operationalized or be operating in any other area of the business, whether it's a geographical location, department, asset, or even process. And even policies can be linked to these individual controls too. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly how we can push this control to be operating in other areas of the business too. And we can go ahead and gather that information on a local level. Just going to quickly go ahead and switch my screen to a wizard-driven approach that allows us to select controls from the library we have just seen. So I can go ahead and select one to many different controls, or even go ahead and give it a quick search for the different controls that I would like to go ahead and select. Once I've selected my controls, I would then go ahead and decide exactly where I want these controls to operate. So I can go ahead and have it operating in particular business processes, assets, or in this case, I'm looking for them to be operating in particular business units. The SureCloud solution will then go ahead and provide you a list of those business units or even processes in other cases, where you can go ahead and select exactly where you want them to operate. So I've selected my controls. I've also selected the targeted area in which I want them to operate. Next, I want to go ahead, and this is an optional step, where you can decide if you want to select a control owner. This will automatically notify the control owner and likewise any assessors or reviewers that will look at the control tests in the creation of this control. The final screen here shows me the selected controls and the targeted area and ask for my final confirmation that I want to go ahead and in this case, create 15 controls. By clicking deploy controls, that will automatically generate those controls for me and notify the respective owners in these cases, where we can go ahead and gather that information, not only on the control itself, how it's operating, but also testing on a lower level. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the view of a control owner. So we've now gone ahead and pushed these controls out to particular owners in finance, HR, or information security. And now, as well as being notified, the owner is going to be able to see these controls that they actually are responsible for in their dashboards. So here is a My Controls dashboard, which a typical control owner will be able to go ahead and view. They can see the number of controls they are operating, any compliance failures, or even any open actions assigned to them. What is also important to note here is that they have sort of like a to-do list of the different pending tests for the controls that are in their responsibility. These tests can be either scheduled, pulled up as a part of a control plan, which can be go ahead and implemented within the SureCloud solution, or alternatively, they can also be manually made. I'm going to go ahead and jump into one of the control tests that we have visibly here, so we can go ahead and see how that works. So as you can see, we've got the workflow at the top here, guiding us through the process all the way over through to sign off. I can see some key information here about the control test itself, but more importantly, I have some mandatory fields here that I need to go ahead and fill in. The mandatory fields ensure that I cannot submit the control test until these have been completed. So to begin with, is the control being operated and implemented and operating correctly? I can say, yes, it is. And I can also use that maturity guidance to understand exactly how well it is operating. And we've got an information piece here that tells you exactly what is expected of that particular maturity. Most importantly, I want to go ahead and demonstrate that this has been done and done correctly. So I can go ahead and attach a file either from my local files or from the likes of SharePoint or even the local files and the library within SureCloud itself. From here, I can go ahead and submit this over to a reviewer who would be taking a look at this control and giving it a once-over look to ensure that we've added in the correct details and that it is operating as expected. As a part of this, we can also add in some actions. So maybe they are operating this particular control correctly and we've got the evidence to prove that. But I want to add an action in to ensure that this control is operating in a particular way. Maybe as a part of this, we want to review a particular policy that is associated to this particular control. I've actually linked up this action here, which shows me that Hannah has been assigned to this action. It also provides me a due date and any updates that have been fed in from Hannah. So when she does provide those, that's going to be fed in live. I can monitor the status, and I can also from here add my own actions if I wanted to generate this. And these are all embedded with notifications to ensure the facilitators are completing these within the given timeframes. In a similar approach, we also look at exceptions. Exceptions can be raised to be able to sign something off for a period of time. For example, if we were to look at the physical security of one of our offices, but we can't go in because there's a coronavirus lockdown, which is very relevant, we can actually raise an exception and say, hey, we want to sign this off for 6 months, and the system will notify us of that being raised again. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that. We'd go through a typical review process where the reviewers will go ahead and check that that's all correct and close down that particular test in that case. What's important to note is that whenever a test is completed, the dashboards are updated in real time to reflect the new results in the controls that are in my bucket. Now we've talked through the likes of control testing, but the final area that I want to go ahead and show you is an overlaying solution that SureCloud calls indicators. So I've just jumped over to my indicators dashboard. Essentially what indicators allows us to do is to be able to set up particular metrics that allows us to do continuous control monitoring. Now, this is really important because the likes of our control owners are only going to come in upon a particular frequency to complete their control tests. But the indicator solution will allow us to automatically monitor our different controls all year round and notify us when we've exceeded given thresholds. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the different indicators tracker that we have here that enlists all the different indicators that we're monitoring. And the one that we're going to take a look at today is the organization policy attestation for any of the policy attestations that are overdue by 15 days. Now you can visibly see here that there is some details that I gathered about exactly what we are measuring or monitoring in this case. So we're looking at the policies that are overdue by 15 days. We've assigned it to an owner. We've marked it against policies that we're looking at in terms of the context. Now this is an indicator that's already been set up and it is actively running in our organization. So I'm going to skip over the results just for now and talk you through exactly how we can set these up. Firstly, I want to point out that you can capture the type of indicator you want to set up or type of metric you would like to monitor. This can either be done manually in various ways, or we can go ahead and set that up automatically. In this case, I've got an automatic indicator that's looking at my policy attestations, and I've set up particular thresholds here. Now, in this case, I've only set up 2, but you can set up as many or as little as you would like. In this case, what I think is good is anything that is less than 1, in this case, for the policy attestation. And for this case, I don't need to be notified whenever this is reached, and I don't want this to show up in my reports. But on the other hand, the other threshold I'm looking at in this case is very bad. So this is for any of the different data that I'm looking at in this case to be more than or equal to the total of 1. In these cases, I know that this is something that exceeds my threshold or our organization's threshold, and I want to be notified by that. And I also want that to go ahead and show up in my reporting. So I've set up the thresholds that I want to be looking at and when to be notified appropriately. Now I can take a look at the source data. The source data essentially tells the system exactly where to look at to be able to check this different information that we are looking at. In this case, I'm looking at the attestations that are going ahead in our organization that we're collecting. But this can actually look at anything. This can look at your processes, your risks, your controls, particular controls in general. We even have various examples of where we can link this up to external solutions. So SureCloud actually have an integration hub which allows you to connect to external solutions and pull and push data from the solution so we can run these different checks and have the data collated in one centralized area. So this source data that we're looking at the moment, I put a few different filters on this. So I want to ensure that the status of the data that it pulls through is definitely overdue. I'm not too worried about those that have been completed. And also the number of days that is overdue by is greater than 15. So SureCloud's gone ahead and run that check. It's pulled back various information here where I can go ahead and see that this is all relevant to the filters that I've applied. I can also run that check here to ensure that it is tested correctly. And then finally, what I want to do is schedule how often I want this check to be commenced. So in this case, I've selected monthly, but you actually have the option to select various different ways. You can have this monitoring on a daily basis with a particular start date, and also the selection of an end date itself too. So I can choose an end date, or in this case, I want it to be going ahead and ever occurring. So I've selected no end date in this circumstance. Once I've activated that, that's when we go ahead and look back at these results. So these results in this case is already flagged to me that the first entry of this result is very, very bad. I can go ahead and pull in actions and automate those, add in actions to be able to put that into a more acceptable threshold into our level of good. So it's going to continue to go ahead and feed these results in here. And also, as set up with our thresholds, it will notify me and be visible in my reports anytime that that is updated. As mentioned previously, all of our reports are updated in real time. So anytime there is any movements of any of our metrics we're measuring, whether they're on target, whether they are active or working as we expect, it will go ahead and show that in real time here in my reports and dashboards. Now that is all from me in terms of the SureCloud demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and hand back over to Matt, who will take any questions that you all have. I think you might be on mute, Matt.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Perfect. Okay, we've only got one question come through, and I think it's from Chris. And the question is saying, how often would we update the regulations? So with the SCF, it's updated when they update it, and we normally do it within 48 hours of getting the latest version. They normally do between 2 and 6 of these a year, depending on the number of things. Some years they do a lot more, but it really varies. In terms of the other regulations, if you go onto our website, there's a list of all the ones we support. Whenever there are new versions of them released, we will upload them into our solution, and then clients can withdraw them. So normally we try and do it within 5 to 10 working days of kind of the new versions being available. Is there any other questions from anyone?
Matt, hi, it's Darren. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi there. Just a quick question about visibility. Say if we were down at a business unit level, I'm guessing with the when you're looking at the My Controls dashboard, you can also see it from a company by company perspective as well. Yeah, so if someone said company A, if all their controls been tested, for example. Yeah,
so that's exactly what you can do. So you can kind of slice and dice it based on however you your org structure kind of exists. And then the permissions that sit at them. So if we set it up that you've got multiple companies that sit under your company, if you've got permissions to that specific company, you will see them. So we limit it based on how you ask us to set it up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Is there any other questions from anyone? Something that's just come from the chat window. Are South African laws and regulations supported? So if there are some in the SCF, they are. If not, we won't directly support them, but that's not to say we can't upload them and manage them. There's nothing stopping us uploading local regulations and standards that sit outside the existing one. We have another question as well. So can SureCloud integrate with existing solutions like ServiceNow? Yes. So we can integrate with ServiceNow. We integrate with most of the big CMDBs. So ServiceNow, Remedy, etc. We can either use we have some pre-built ones, but these can also be highly configured to your individual needs as an organization. So you can pull over specific asset types, levels, services, depending on however you want to set it up. Is there any other questions? Oh, got another one. So the question is, how do we ensure users only see the controls within their business unit when setting up their profile, e.g. in Risk Manager, add to a business unit? Okay, so users will only see based on where we assign them. So if they're not tagged as potentially the user who has access to that area, so either they're a risk manager at a business, they're a control manager at a specific area, they're tagged to it. There's a combination of two things. You need to be tagged to something or a group that's kind of inherited some way, but you also need to have the permissions. So if you don't have a risk manager role or control manager role, you don't see anything. And then it's also based on the context of where your role's applied. So it's quite easy to set up. So you can say this person belongs to this business area, so they see things that are associated to this business area. Is there any other questions? Okay. So just a bit of information. Obviously, feel free to contact me. My email address is there, and my LinkedIn if you want to reach out for any more deep dives on those questions. Also, feel free to get in contact with SureCloud on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, etc. We have got a series of webinars coming up. So we have got a specific webinar on UK SOX. I know a lot of organizations are starting to plan and prepare for this. There's some on future of PCI DSS, how to embed continuous monitoring in your compliance program, and we've got our ongoing cyber threat briefing. Thank you everyone for attending. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you everyone.